The first sound is a breath, ragged, wet, and trembling, echoing somewhere inside the stone throat of an underground chamber. It drags through the stale air like a wounded animal trying not to be heard. A boy's breath, too fast, too shallow, too human. The darkness around him presses close thick and damp, smelling of clay-burnt resin and old ashes long settled into the pores of the earth. He cannot see the walls, but he can feel the cold radiating from them, as if the chamber itself remembers every soul that has ever been trapped within it. A faint shuffle of sand breaks the stillness. The boy flinches, small shoulders tightening beneath coarse wool that scratches against his skin. In the dark, he lifts a quivering hand, fingers, brushing the rough limestone beside him. The stone is slick with moisture, or perhaps with something older. His fingertips recoil instinctively as though touching a memory he should not have touched. Above him, a hollow thud rumbles through the ceiling. Dust rains down softly, drifting through the black like tiny stars. He tries not to breathe it in, but it clings to his tongue, dry and metallic. Footsteps follow slow, deliberate, muffled through layers of earth, but unmistakably human. Sandaled soles, heavy, confident, moving with the cadence of ritual, not haste. A torch ignites, not near him, far ahead. A thin, wavering flame blooms behind a grid of carved stone, sending thin ribbons of light that crawl through the slits like searching fingers. The chamber doesn't brighten. Instead, the torchlight merely reveals new darkness, new corners where shadows congeal like pooled ink. Smoke curls upward, carrying the smell of pitch and cedar. It slithers toward him, the scent invading his nostrils, burning faintly. Voices follow. They rise from a deeper corridor, low, rhythmic, and ancient. A chant with no warmth, no mercy. Men's voices, controlled, rehearsed. Each syllable strikes like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the chamber with unnerving precision. The boy's legs buckle. He sinks to his knees, palms pressed flat to the gritty floor. His skin is cold, but sweat slicks his back. He draws in a sharp breath, and the sound of it echoes too loudly in the vast black. He clamps a hand over his mouth, trying to swallow his panic, but his breath still trembles against his fingers. The chanting grows louder. Another torch flares, then another. A procession approaches the grated stone wall, still distant, distorted by the wavering light, but their shapes materialize slowly, tall figures draped in layered robes of black and scarlet, the color shifting like blood beneath shadow. Metal glints along their forearms, bracelets, or ceremonial bands engraved with spiraling symbols. Their hoods are deep, swallowing their faces. The boy squints through the slits of the stone grill. His heart stammers. One of the robed figures carries an object wrapped in dark cloth. Another holds a bronze bowl, its rim etched with something jagged. A third carries a staff capped with a small hollow sphere that hums faintly, vibrating with each step as if something inside it is alive. The air tightens. The chanting stops. The silence that replaces it is heavier than sound, like the breath just before a storm breaks. The figures halt in front of the stone grill. Their torches sizzle softly. Smoke twists upward in slow serpentine curls. The scent of burning resin grows overpowering, coating the boy's throat until he nearly gags. A single figure steps forward. His robes are darker than the others, so black they seem to absorb the torchlight. When he raises his head, the hood shifts just enough to reveal a fragment of a jaw. Smooth, pale, utterly still. Not young, not old, timeless. The kind of stillness only power can carve into a man. He lifts the wrapped object, unfolds the cloth. Inside, something glows faintly, an amber light, warm and wrong. The boy can't make out the shape, not fully, but it pulses softly like a heartbeat struggling against confinement. The figure speaks not a chant, not a prayer, but a single word spoken with the quiet authority of someone who expects the world to obey. The torches bow inward as if responding. The bronze bowl is raised. The humming sphere cracks open with a soft splitting sound. The boy presses his back to the cold stone behind him, breath-shuddering fingers clawing at the earth. His pulse hammers against his ribs. He does not understand what the object is, or why it glows, or what the men intend, but he feels the truth instinctively, viscerally. Whatever is about to happen has happened before, many times. A sudden gust of heat presses through the stone slits. A light blinding violence erupts. The boy's mouth opens in a silent scream. When the light fades, it leaves behind a silence older than memory itself. And from that silence, our investigation begins. What you witnessed, fragmentary, disorienting, suffocating mirrors, the scattered traces left behind by a civilization whose most guarded secrets were sealed beneath centuries of ash conquest and deliberate erasure. the Carthaginians, masters of trade, war, and ritual, left the world vast harbors, unbreakable walls, and legends of unimaginable wealth. But beneath that glittering veneer lay another inheritance, one the ancient writers whispered about, only in veiled accusations, and one their own priests inscribed only in codes and shadows. For generations, historians dismissed these whispers as slander crafted by enemies. Yet the earth, when disturbed, tends to speak the truth. In the last century, layers of soil outside ancient Carthage began to yield objects that did not belong to the realm, of mere rumor-charred tablets inscribed with forbidden liturgies, sealed jars containing resin-coated figurines, underground alcoves built for a purpose no daylight ritual ever required. These fragments did not answer questions. They multiplied them. Tonight we follow those questions into the dark corridors of Carthage's most secretive institution, the high priesthood of Baal Hammon and Tanit, a priesthood whose power did not rest merely in temples and ceremonies, but in rituals conducted far from watchful eyes, rituals whispered to be older than the city itself. Our mission is not to sensationalize, it is to reconstruct, piece by piece, shadow by shadow, because 5 rituals stand apart from all others, rituals so deeply buried, so meticulously concealed, that their existence reshapes our understanding of Carthaginian religion, authority, and fear, and every one of them carries the same echo, a child's breath in the dark. To understand the secret practices of Carthage's high priests, we must first descend into the world that shaped them, an empire forged by the sea, hardened by war, and bound by a cosmology in which the divine was never distant, never silent, never benign. It was a world where smoke salt and shadows coiled around every aspect of life, and where the breath of the gods was believed to seep through the cracks of the earth itself. The ancient city of Carthage did not rise gently from the Mediterranean. It thrust upward like a dark monolith, its great walls gleaming with sandstone that carried the scent of sea spray and hot dust. The harbor, an engineering marvel, was circular, concentric, symmetrical, in a way that suggested both precision and obsession. Ships moved in and out like controlled breaths, their wooden hulls creaking under the weight of copper ingots, dyes, cedar, ivory, and other treasures harvested from the edges of the known world. But farther inland, away from the bustling markets and shouting sailors, the atmosphere changed. The streets narrowed, light diminished, and the scent of the sea gave way to burning incense damp earth and the low hum of voices speaking words not meant for foreign ears. This was the realm of the priesthood. In Carthage, religion was not merely ritual, it was governance, it was law, it was the backbone of state identity. Every war, every treaty, every shipment that left the harbors carried with it a blessing or curse believed to shape its fate. The high priests acted as intermediaries between rulers and the divine, but their true authority lay in their mastery over fear, fear of what the gods might demand, fear of what omens might foretell, fear of what silence might imply. The most powerful religious office was held by the high priest of Baal Hammon, a figure whose robes were woven from black wool, thick enough to muffle sound. His presence was marked by the smell of burning resin and the faint chime of bronze pendants at his wrists. Tanit, the goddess of life and fertility, stood alongside Baal Hammon in spiritual importance, but her rituals were rarely public. They unfolded in smaller sanctuaries behind veils, among priestesses sworn to lifelong secrecy. The high priest lived in compounds known as the Beth Elam houses of the gods, where the walls were thick, the windows narrow, and the air perpetually tinged with incense. The stone floors were worn smooth by centuries of sandaled feet shuffling in slow ritual arcs. Lamps hung from chains, their flames flickering like trapped spirits. These compounds connected through a series of tunnels and sunken passages to deeper structures. Chambers of initiation storage rooms for sacred implements and archives carved directly into bedrock. Much of what we know or think we know comes from Greek and Roman commentators whose words often carried venom. They described Carthaginian priests as cold, calculating, and ruthless. They insinuated that beneath every public ceremony, another darker one occurred out of sight. Their accusations were filled with smoke and trembling figures with drums beating through fog, with high priests whose faces were hidden by carved masks representing the divine. And yet archaeology sometimes aligns disturbingly well with these hostile accounts. In 1921, digging near the ancient sanctuary district, a team uncovered a tablet fragment bearing a stylized depiction of a crescent moon hovering over a burning brazier. Beneath it, half effaced by time, were words translated as, "The night belongs to the open-eyed ones. Turn your gaze away." The fragment was small, but the feeling it carried was immense. The stroke of the chisel was sharp, deliberate, carved by a steady hand that knew exactly how much pressure to apply. The edges of the tablet still bore traces of soot. No discussion of Carthaginian ritual can avoid the Tophet, a sprawling open-air precinct filled with urns containing charred remains, marked with stelae, carved with symbols of Tanit and Baal Hammon. For centuries, scholars debated whether this was a cemetery for infants or a ritual site connected to offerings. The truth perhaps lies somewhere between, but its atmosphere is undeniable. Walking through the excavation site today, one can still smell the faint aroma of baked clay and earth. The sun beats down on the sandstone markers, yet deep in the soil, the temperature drops sharply as though the ground retains a memory of cold nights when flames once flickered over pits. A Roman-era inscription discovered there reads, "To appease the silence we offered what was ours." The ambiguity is unsettling. Those chosen for priestly life were selected young. Boys and girls, sometimes as early as 7 or 8, were taken into temple compounds, where they learned the liturgy's symbols and movements required for ritual communication. Their daily existence was rigidly controlled. Dawn purification baths in cold water, chanting exercises in narrow courtyards, hours spent copying sacred symbols onto tablets made of wax clay, and occasionally thin sheets of hammered lead. Visitors who glimpsed young initiates described them as eerily calm, disciplined, and slow in their movements, trained to eliminate hesitation from their gestures. They wore simple tunics, walked barefoot, and slept on reed mats in communal rooms, lit only by a single oil lamp that burned through the night. The older priests rarely spoke to them except through ritual instruction. Silence was seen as a conduit to the divine. This silence grew so deeply rooted that some initiates reportedly lost the instinct to speak casually, their voices emerging only in ritual cadences. One fragmentary inscription found in a subterranean chamber of the high temple complex reads, "Only in silence can the gods hear the truth." Historical texts describe dozens of rituals, but only a handful were classified as Sodo Elionim, the high secrets. These were known only to the highest-ranking priests, and references to them appear only in coded forms: spirals, crescent shapes, sequences of dots, and stylized flames. Scholars have long believed these symbols to be ceremonial shorthand or esoteric calendars, but recent studies suggest they may represent actual procedures, steps in a sequence carried out deep underground or under torchlight within temple chambers sealed to the public. Fragments from 3 separate clay tablets, each burned on one edge, contain alignments of symbols that some researchers believe correspond to the 5 most secretive rituals. When reconstructed, the patterns unfold like a map: a crescent over crossed lines, a spiral reaching downward, a flame trapped within a circle, 2 vertical marks flanking an eye, a stylized mountain with a hollow center. The similarity between these patterns across multiple independent locations suggests a standardization of ritual procedure, a chilling thought given the secrecy of their use. In 2006, an excavation beneath the remains of a Carthaginian storehouse uncovered something that would dramatically alter our understanding of the priesthood. While clearing out a collapsed underground corridor, researchers found a section of wall coated in a thick layer of soot. On it were faint carvings, so faint they nearly escaped notice. But under directed light, they revealed a scene, a line of hooded figures standing before a stone altar, hands raised over a brazier. At the center of the scene, kneeling, was a small human figure, head bowed, body trembling. The carving was primitive, lacking detail, as though the artist feared being caught. But the image had weight. In the dim light of the excavation chamber, dust drifting like ghosts, it was impossible not to feel the centuries pressing down. Next to the scene, etched more deeply, was a symbol scholars had seen before the stylized mountain with the hollow center. A note found nearby, presumably left by the archaeologist who first saw it, read, "Whatever happened here, it was not meant to be recorded." And yet someone could not keep their silence. When Rome razed Carthage in 146 BCE, fire consumed temples, archives, and homes. The smell of burning cedar and human panic choked the air for days. By the time the smoke cleared, the city's foundations had been scraped bare. Priests vanished, records disappeared, ritual implements were shattered or melted down. Whatever the high priest knew, they carried to their graves. Yet the rituals themselves outlived them, buried in fragments, hidden in soot, preserved in the stillness of sealed chambers, waiting for someone willing to listen. Because beneath Carthage's political grandeur and military might lay an older, deeper truth, the belief that the gods observed every breath, every act, every fear, and that the priests alone knew how to speak back into the watching darkness. Tonight we will speak of the 5 rituals they guarded most fiercely. Rituals whispered of even among priests with trembling voices. Rituals that turned breath into offering, silence into sacrifice, stone into witness. Rituals whose shadows still cling to the ruins. The deeper we move into the forgotten rites of Carthage, the colder the air becomes, as if every step draws us further underground, further into chambers where torchlight trembled against damp stone, and where the breath of terrified supplicants mixed with incense and smoke. The high priest believed that power did not reside merely in offerings or prayers. It resided in secrecy, in controlling who knew what, in deciding who could speak and who must be silenced. 5 rituals formed the core of their hidden authority. 5 ceremonies whispered only within the Beth Elam and executed beneath veiled moonlight. Each ritual served a distinct purpose. Each required a distinct sacrifice, not always of flesh, but always of fear. We begin with the least terrible, and ascend. Every Carthaginian initiate, before their first entrance into the deeper temple chambers, underwent a night-long ordeal, known only in fragments until recently. The text called it Mishmar Ene Tusho, the Vigil of the Open-Eyed Ones. Its purpose was purification, but its method was something closer to psychological rupture. The ritual took place in a long, narrow hall, carved deep beneath the high temple. The walls were bare limestone, perpetually damp, smelling of minerals and old smoke. Along the ceiling, tiny slits allowed faint drafts of sea air to whistle through, creating soft, unsettling moans that echoed endlessly between the stone. Initiates, usually boys and girls between 10 and 14, were led into this hall at dusk. Their eyes were covered with bands of coarse black wool that scraped the skin raw. They were dressed in simple tunics, barefoot, silent. One by one, they were placed along the corridor, backs pressed against the cold wall. The covers were removed, and they were told to watch. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Darkness so total it felt alive. But slowly, achingly slowly, small points of light began to appear. Not torches, not stars, eyes. Carved eyes. Hundreds of them. They filled the walls from floor to ceiling, large, small, almond-shaped round. Some with stylized lashes, others with empty hollows. They seemed to float in the dark as the faintest breath of air stirred the lamps hidden behind the carvings. When the light flickered, the eyes appeared to blink. The initiates were required to stare at them, unmoving, unblinking. Priests hid in the darkness behind the walls, whispering in low, disembodied voices. The gods watch even when you cannot see. Do not look away. Only those who do not tremble will be chosen. Hours passed. The cold numbed their feet. Their backs stiffened. The lamps behind the eyes sputtered, casting sudden shadows that made the carved shapes appear to shift wide and narrow. Some initiates began to gasp softly. Others bit their own wrists to keep still. One tablet fragment discovered in 2014 contains a line etched by a trembling hand. I began to feel that the eyes were seeing something in me I did not know existed. The vigil continued until the sun rose, and faint daylight seeped through the ceiling slits, dimming the carved lights. Those who fainted were carried out quietly and never admitted to the deeper ranks. Those who endured were marked not with ink, not with scarification, but with knowledge. They had learned the first truth of the priesthood. Fear is a door, and someone else controls the key. The second ritual was conducted only for selected initiates, those who had shown unusual composure or unusual silence. It was known as Lishkat Kolot Nistarim, the Chamber of Echoed Promises. Unlike the vigil which broke the body's endurance, this ritual targeted the mind. The chamber lay beneath the priestly housing quarters, accessible only through a spiraling passageway so narrow that participants had to turn their shoulders sideways. The twist of the corridor created an oppressive dizziness. The smell of damp stone intensified with every downward step. When the final stair was reached, the corridor opened into a spherical room made of polished limestone. Its acoustics were unnatural. One whisper became 10. A sigh became a chorus. The priests exploited this. 3 initiates entered together, though they were spaced far apart, unable to see each other in the low torchlight. The torches were set inside bronze bowls so that their flames licked upward like tongues tasting the air. Smoke accumulated at the top of the chamber, swirling in slow spirals that mirrored the carved patterns on the walls. The initiates stood still, while the high priest entered last. His footsteps clicked against the stone, echoing in layers that made him seem to walk in circles, even when he stood still. His voice, when it emerged, seemed to come from everywhere at once. The gods hear every promise. The gods remember every lie. The ritual required initiates to speak a vow, one vow chosen with trembling deliberation. For some it was loyalty, for others obedience, for a select few secrecy. The terrifying part was not the vow itself. It was the echo. Once spoken, their words multiplied, ricocheting from wall to ceiling to floor. Their promises returned, distorted, older, deeper, as if other voices had spoken alongside them, repeating the vow after centuries of silence. One initiate, a girl named Thenia, age approximately 12, carved a note into her wax tablet afterward. When I said my vow, I heard my own voice say it back to me with a sorrow I did not understand. It felt like the chamber was warning me, not blessing me. Priests watched the children carefully. Those who broke down covering their ears or screaming were considered unfit. Those who remained silent, those who listened to their own voices return twisted and weathered, were welcomed. This ritual served a dual purpose: to bind loyalty and to plant dread. Because once a vow had been spoken in that chamber, the initiate could never again escape the sense that someone was always listening. Even in sleep, even in thought, even in silence. The third ritual, referenced obliquely in several Punic inscriptions, straddles the line between devotion and psychological torment. It was called Zevak Shemot Gurot, the offering of the unspoken names. Its purpose was to erase identity, not literally but symbolically and with devastating emotional precision. Only older initiates, usually between 16 and 19, underwent this rite. They were taken at night to a subterranean courtyard that lay beneath the temple of Tanit. The courtyard was roofless, allowing the moon to illuminate the center, while the surrounding walls drowned in shadow. Initiates were instructed to kneel in a circle around a large bronze dish, filled with smoldering embers and aromatic herbs. The smoke spiraled upward, carrying the scents of myrtle cedar and something sharper, perhaps, crushed juniper berries. It stung the eyes and coated the tongue with a bitter residue. In front of each initiate lay a small clay tablet. They were told to write their own names. Not titles, not priestly designations, their birth names. For many, this was the first time those names had been spoken or written since childhood. Some trembled as they inscribed the letters, as though the soundless act of naming themselves had awakened memories they had long suppressed families. They had not seen fields they once played in mothers, whose voices they barely remembered. Once the names were written, the high priest stepped into the moonlit center. His robe absorbed the light, leaving him a silhouette of impossible darkness. He instructed the initiates to lift their tablets. One by one they did, and one by one he broke them. He took each tablet into his gloved hands and snapped it cleanly in two, letting the fragments fall onto the embers. As they struck the heat, the clay hissed softly, releasing curls of pale smoke. "Your old name has been given," he intoned. "Your new name will be earned." The emotional impact was profound. A recovered lead tablet etched by an unknown initiate reads, "When he broke my name, I felt a part of myself fall into the fire, and for a moment I wanted to reach for it." The ritual symbolized complete surrender to the priesthood. It taught that identity was mutable, disposable, and subject to divine authority. But it also served a darker function. It uprooted the initiate's sense of self, making them more susceptible to later rituals whose psychological demands were far more severe. The offering of names established the foundation for loyalty that could not be questioned, broken, or reclaimed. Those who emerged from the courtyard walked differently, more slowly, more deliberately, as though carrying a weight they could not explain. In many ways, the ritual was a burial without a body, a burial where the grave was internal. The fourth ritual is one of the most disturbing, not because of what was done to participants, but because of what they were forced to do to themselves. It was known as Mivchan Derek Bel Havel, the trial of the Breathless Path. Its existence was confirmed only after the discovery of a narrow underground corridor in 1978, beneath layers of collapsed stone. The corridor stretched 30 meters, lined with smooth limestone walls polished to a mirror-like sheen. Torchlight revealed faint fingerprints along the stone, hundreds of them, suggesting that generations of initiates touched the walls as they walked. But walked is the wrong word. They crawled. The ritual demanded that initiates traverse the entire corridor with a burning vessel balanced on their backs. The vessel was a small clay saucer filled with glowing coals, placed atop a flat wooden plate tied to the initiate with thin cords. The heat radiated downward, warming the skin uncomfortably, but not burning it unless the initiate faltered. If they slipped, the coals would spill. If they panicked, the vessel would tilt. If they rushed, the cords would wobble. They had to move slowly, breathlessly, on hands and knees. The corridor was barely high enough to crawl through. The air was thick and stale. The walls held the day's heat, turning the narrow space into an oven. The sound of their own breathing bounced off the stone in ragged echoes, an auditory reminder of their vulnerability. Priests followed behind at a distance, carrying long bronze tubes through which they blew sharp bursts of cold air. These blasts extinguished any coal that spilled, an act of mercy that doubled as rebuke. At the corridor's end lay a small alcove where a single oil lamp flickered. Initiates were required to sit before it, allowing their backs to cool. Many wept silently, overwhelmed by the heat, the claustrophobia, and the knowledge that their own bodies had become the instruments of ritual. One inscription carved into the corridor wall reads, "When I reached the final lamp, I felt as though the earth had swallowed me and returned me changed." The trial of the Breathless Path taught control under pressure. It taught stillness under fear. But more than that, it taught the initiates that their suffering was not imposed, it was chosen, a psychological turn far more dangerous than any punishment. For those who believed they had chosen their own pain could be led anywhere, even into the final ritual. The fifth and final ritual is the most terrifying both in its design and its intent. Known as Masak Har Reich, the Veil of the Hollow Mountain, it was reserved only for full priests about to assume significant power. Its location remains unknown in modern times. But ancient sources point to a cavern somewhere beyond the city walls, perhaps in the cliff ranges to the northwest, where wind moves through jagged openings like a low, continuous moan. Fragments from 3 independent inscriptions describe the ritual. The first fragment speaks of a journey. We walked until the torches fought the wind. This suggests the cavern was exposed, its entrance battered by sea gusts carrying salt and mist. The temperature there would have been colder than the city, with the scent of brine mixing with limestone dust. Inside the cavern widened into a natural amphitheater. The walls glittered faintly with mineral deposits reflecting torchlight, like 1,000 tiny eyes, the same symbolism that began in the Vigil, now returned in monstrous scale. At the cavern's center stood a stone dais carved directly from the bedrock. Surrounding it were concentric circles of markers, some stone, some bronze, some nothing more than wooden stakes driven into the earth. Scholars believe these indicated the positions priests were required to stand during the ritual. The second inscription describes the opening act. The wind carried our breath away before we could hold it. Priests entered in complete silence. Their robes were different from city ceremonies here. They wore garments of rough linen dyed a pale, ghost-like gray. Their hoods were deeper, obscuring everything but the faint outlines of their mouths. In the center of the dais lay an object described only as the hollow shell. Its composition is unknown. Some suggest pottery, others suggest metal. One Roman writer known for exaggeration, but unsettlingly specific, claimed it was carved from bone. The ritual began with the extinguishing of all torches. Darkness fell like a physical weight, pressing bodies downward. The wind howled faintly through the cavern mouth, creating whistling tones that rose and fell like distant cries. The high priest spoke first. One line, always the same. "Into the hollow we cast what remains." Each priest then stepped forward one by one and whispered into the hollow shell something they feared most. Not sins, not confessions, fears. Fear of failure, fear of illness, fear of being forgotten, fear of the gods themselves. The shell was believed to absorb these fears, storing them in its emptiness until the collective weight transformed it into a vessel of power, one that granted the high priest uncontested authority through the invocation of shared vulnerability. The final act was the most disturbing. The high priest lifted the shell and placed it over his own face. It covered his features entirely. When he breathed, the sound echoed through the cavern, hollow, amplified, inhuman. The priests surrounding him knelt, pressing their foreheads to the cold earth. A Greek inscription discovered in a private collection, its authenticity debated, describes the moment. When the shell covered him, his voice no longer belonged to flesh. It came from the mountain. The ritual ended with the relighting of the torches. The high priest removed the shell. The priests rose, and nothing more was said. But something had changed. Some priests were reported to have emerged from the cavern, pale, trembling, unable to sleep for days. Others became unnervingly calm. A few vanished into seclusion. The Veil of the Hollow Mountain was not a ceremony of power. It was a ceremony of surrender. Surrender to fear, surrender to silence, surrender to whatever truth dwelled within that hollow shell, an echo perhaps of every trembling voice before it. And thus, the 5 rituals formed a chain, each link tightening each shadow, deepening each breath, drawn closer to something ancient and watching. For decades, the 5 rituals seemed complete, terrifying, yes, but self-contained, forming a closed circle of psychological discipline and priestly control. But history rarely leaves its horrors neatly arranged. Sometimes it hides one final piece so deeply that only the accident of a collapsing wall, a shifting foundation, or a misplaced tool can bring it back into the light. Such an accident occurred in 2019, during restoration work near the ancient sanctuary district. A support beam gave way, cracking through a previously uncharted sub-level beneath the ruins. Dust rose in a suffocating cloud. Lights flickered, and when workers descended coughing through the haze, they found a narrow passageway choked with rubble, its walls bearing faint red pigments almost invisible under centuries of decay. Archaeologists arrived within hours. For days they worked in silence, brushing away layers of debris, revealing symbols none had seen before, variations of the 5 ritual patterns, but arranged not in isolation as previous tablets had shown, but in sequence. A story was unfolding. At the passage's end lay a sealed doorway stone fitted so perfectly that no air had passed through in more than 2 millennia. Its surface bore a single carving, the stylized mountain with the hollow center. But surrounding it were smaller figures, kneeling, trembling faces pressed to the ground. Not initiates, not priests, children. The revelation came slowly, like a flame struggling through darkness. Behind the doorway, after careful removal and structural support, archaeologists uncovered a small chamber barely high enough to stand in. Its walls were blackened by smoke. In the center lay a circular depression filled with hardened soot and fragments of cracked clay. At first it seemed like yet another ritual fire pit, but then they found the tablets, 14 of them, small, crude, rushed. Each contained a name, names of children. Their handwriting was unsteady lines, wavering letters, incomplete. Some tablets were smeared as if written through tears or trembling hands. And beneath each name lay the same phrase, scratched faintly but unmistakably. I offer myself so another may live. The earlier rituals, identity erasure, breath control, vow distortion, took on a different shape in light of this discovery. They were not merely psychological training, they were preparation for a final forbidden rite, unrecorded in any surviving source, the offering of a chosen youth, whose voluntary surrender would sanctify the authority of the high priest. But not through death, through disappearance. The soot pattern suggested not immolation, but concealment. A Greek marginal note written centuries later hinted at what this chamber truly meant. In Carthage, some children did not die. They were taken into the hollow. The hollow. The word echoed across rituals, across symbols, across the darkest fears of every initiate. Whatever the high priest demanded, it did not end with fire. It ended with silence, with lives erased, names hidden, victims swallowed by a ritual no historian had dared imagine until now. And the greatest horror was not what happened. It was that they chose it, or believed they had. In the quiet that follows, revelation, history exhales. Slowly, unevenly, like a body recovering from something it should never have endured. The chamber beneath Carthage, dark, cramped, suffocating with ancient soot, does not simply expand what we know about the high priests. It challenges the boundaries of what we permit ourselves to believe about the past. For centuries, the priesthood was depicted as either monstrous or misunderstood depending on which empire held the pen. But truth rarely chooses sides. It lingers in dust and silence, waiting for the moment a crack in the earth lets it speak again. The discovery of the children's tablets did not deliver answers. It delivered echoes. Echoes of lives shaped by fear and devotion, of choices made in shadows where no child should ever stand. When we trace the 5 rituals now, we see a pattern not of cruelty alone, but of control, refined, cultivated, sharpened into a spiritual instrument. The vigil taught fear, the chamber taught doubt, the offering taught surrender, the breathless path taught obedience, and the veil taught the high priest to wield the collective terror of his own followers. But the hidden chamber taught the final lesson. Power once sanctified by silence becomes almost impossible to confront. As we walk the ruins today, Dust brushing our ankles, wine carrying the scent of salt and age, we are reminded that every empire, no matter how mighty, is built on the breath of its people. Some breath steady, others trembling, some forced into stillness, others extinguished entirely. And though Carthage fell burned and crumbled into ashes beneath a foreign sun, the voices of those taken into the hollow remain. Not loud, not vengeful, simply present, woven into the stone grains, echoing faintly beneath the footsteps of modern scholars, who descend with lamps and notebooks into chambers, once meant to be forgotten. In the end, the past does not sleep. It lingers, watching, remembering. And perhaps that is the final truth Carthage leaves us, that no ritual, not even one carved in fear and sealed in darkness, can silence a name forever. Because memory endures, because ruins whisper, because even in the deepest hollow, someone somewhere will one day listen. And the stone will speak,